So in today's video, I'll show you a simple method for painting endless cozy landscapes like this in Procreate. I think you'll be able to follow this process with any brushes you have, but I'll put a list of everything I'm using in the description. First, I'm going to start by painting the background wash. So for that, I'm going to use the abstract round brush and a somewhat medium orange tone, nothing too saturated. And using this at a pretty large size, I'm going to create a wash using horizontal strokes like this. And after that, I want to add a kind of rough fall leaves texture to this. So I'll make a layer above my background wash. For the brush, I'm going to use the stippling brush. And I'm just going to use a few different shades of oranges and yellows. And I'm going to go all over it just like this. And that looks pretty good. Now to control this texture, I'm going to change the transparency mode to multiply. And then I can adjust the opacity and set it to a point where it looks right. There we go, and once I'm happy with it, I can pinch it together with the background wash so it's on one layer. Now at the top here, I want to add a kind of sky and some distant mountains, so I need to cut a space for that. So I'm going to grab the eraser brush, which is set to the fine liner pen, and I'm just going to erase a kind of silhouette of some hills. And after that, I'm going to make another blank layer, but I'm going to place it below our kind of orange wash here, and this is where I'm going to paint the sky. So for that, I'm going to switch back to the abstract round, and I'm going to use a very light kind of steely blue-gray tone, and I'm going to use it to do another kind of side-to-side wash, just like we did for the original landscape. And now for the kind of distant mountains, I'm going to make another blank layer that's above the sky, but still below the background wash, and I'm going to use a slightly darker version of our sky tone, same abstract round, and I'm just going to kind of create a sort of rough shape here in the background, and I think that looks like mountains. And now to finish up the sky, I'm going to add some clouds. So I'll make another new blank layer. I'm going to use pure white, and I'm going to use a default Procreate brush in the drawing tab called the gloaming brush, and I'm going to use it at a large size and just create some blobs like this. Then after that, I'm going to grab the eraser brush, still set to the fine liner pen, and I'm going to use it to flatten the bottoms of the clouds. And when I painted these clouds, I made sure that the ones on top were larger and they got smaller as they got closer to the horizon. This helps with the kind of illusion of distance, and if you're not quite happy with the position of where they turned out, you can always move them around with the arrow tool. And once all the different parts of the background scene are finished, I'm going to merge all the layers for that onto one. And I want to sort of clean up the edges just so it's easier for me to work with. So a kind of trick I use sometimes is to just run the artwork off the edge of the artboard and then leave the selection tool. Then I can go back to it again and you can see it sort of cut that off. And I'm going to do that for all the sides. And this next part is optional, but I want to add some kind of intentional imperfections to this background wash to make it look more natural. So to do that, I'm going to grab this selection tool set to freehand, and I'll just make a random crazy selection like this. Then I'll reconnect it. I'm going to feather it out quite a bit. Then I'll go to hue, saturation, and brightness. And because of that kind of crazy selection, I can create almost a random kind of adjustment of the brightness and the colors. So I'm going to play with this and try to drop in a very subtle second tone. And with the background finished, we can move on and start painting the houses. And those are going to be on their own layer, so I'll make another blank layer. For the color, you can do any colors, but for this one I want to keep it simple, and I'm going to use a very light ivory tone. And I'm actually not going to paint these on, I'm going to use the selection tool. So I'm going to grab the selection tool, set it to rectangle, and then I'm going to set it to color fill. And basically I can draw a box, and as soon as I let it go, it instantly fills that in. And I'm just going to go through here and draw a bunch of boxes, one for each house. And after that, I want to add a little triangle to each one. And this is going to be kind of the pitch of the roof. And the process is really similar, except this time I'm going to use the freehand selection tool instead of the rectangle. And I'm just going to tap on the screen to kind of plot out all the points. And I'm going to do this for each house. And that looks pretty good. Don't worry too much about the kind of composition of the houses because we can move them around later on. For now, I'm going to move on and do the roofs. So for that, I'm going to use a dark, rich brown tone. And for the brush, I'm going to use the fine liner pen. But I'm going to use it at a pretty small size. And I'm going to use the snapping feature in Procreate. You're probably already familiar with it. But basically, if you just quickly draw a line and then hold the position at the end, it'll let you kind of drag it around. And I'm going to use this to plot out the rough shape of the roof. And once I have it kind of closed off, I can just drag the color and drop it in and it will fill in that shape. And I'll go ahead and do this for every house. Now, the reason I'm using the selection tool and the snapping tool to make perfectly straight houses is because I want them to have a kind of contrast with the more abstract background. And while I've got this brown tone still selected, I'm going to grab the selection tool again, set to rectangle, and I'm going to use it to draw on all the chimneys. So the next step here is optional. I want to add an interesting texture to each house, and this is what I'm going to use the free house texture brushes for, and you can find those linked in the description. And I've got them here already, and you can use any textures you want, but I want to use the simple siding brush. And here's the layer with the houses. I'm going to do all the textures on layers above, so I'll make a blank layer above it. I'm going to use a dark, kind of reddish gray tone. And you can change the size of these brushes, but the pattern doesn't change. So I recommend using them at a pretty small size, and then you can kind of draw within the bounds of the house and kind of avoid going over the edges too much. And that looks pretty good, but the texture is a little bit too strong. So I'm going to change the transparency mode of the texture to multiply, and then set the opacity to a point where it's just barely visible. And then once I'm happy with it, I'm going to pinch it together and merge it with the house layer. And you could definitely go through and repeat that process and add different textures to the kind of sides of the house and the roof, but I want to keep this one simple, so I think this is good enough. Now, before I move on and add more details to the houses, I want to kind of mess with the composition. So what I'm going to do is use the selection tool set to freehand, and I can select each house individually and then use the arrow tool to move it around. And I'm going to use this to kind of play around and see if I can find a better arrangement. And there we go. I think this arrangement looks a lot better. Next, I want to add some smoke coming from the chimneys. So I'll make a layer above the house. I'll choose pure white, and I'm going to go back to that gloaming brush, the one I used for the clouds, and this is what I'm going to use to paint the smoke. And at this point, I can move on and add the windows and doors. And all of those are going to be on their own layer, but I want to make sure it's above the houses, but still below the smoke. For the brush, I recommend doing all of this with the fine liner pen, and a few different shades of kind of a dark brown. And this is definitely optional, but I decided to add some colorful shutters on a few of the houses. And after that, I want to add a little bit of shading under the roof. So I'll make a new layer above this. I'm going to set it to multiply. And I'm going to use a medium gray tone, same fine liner pen, but maybe a slightly larger size. And I'm going to use this to draw a line just under the roof. And in this case, the effect is too strong. So I'm going to lower the opacity of this kind of roof shadow and set it to a point like that. And then once I'm happy with it, I'm going to merge the shadows, the windows and doors, and the houses together onto one layer. And now that the houses are finished, I'm going to move on and make the roads. And those are going to be on their own layer, but I'm going to make sure it's kind of behind the houses. So it's still above the background, but behind the houses. For the color, I'm going to use a pretty dark, kind of bluish gray like that. And for the brush, I think I want something pretty smooth, so I'm going to use the hard edge round. And I'm just going to use this to draw on a loose network of roads. And if you want to, you can add a cobblestone texture to these roads. So to do that, I'll make a blank layer above the roads. I'm going to choose pure white, and I'm going to switch back to the house texture brushes and grab the cobblestone brush. And I'm going to use this at a size that will fit on the roads. And I'm just going to paint on the texture like this. And I think that texture looks pretty good, but I will lighten it just a little bit. And then I'll pinch and merge it together with the road layer. Now you can see that the roads go beyond the edge of the illustration, and I did that on purpose because I'm going to use it for a cool effect later on. But for now, I'm going to move on and start painting some trees. And those are going to be on their own layer, but the layer is going to be above the houses, but still below the smoke. And for the color, I'm just going to use a very light orange-yellow tone, really anything like this that will stand off from the background. For the brush, I'm going to use the fine liner pen. And I want the lines to be very clean and clear, sort of like the houses. So I'm going to use this at a small size. And for example, I'm just going to draw out a shape like this, and then I can drag in my color and fill it out. And I'm going to do this and create maybe 4 or 5 different trees. And after that, I can do the trunk and the branches. And it's super easy. I'm just going to use a lighter version of our tree tone. I'll just draw the lines like this. And then I'll use the eraser brush to kind of erase them back. And you don't have to, but there's another easy kind of tree that fits this theme. It's just going to be a leafless tree. So I'm going to choose a medium saturated brown tone. Same fine liner pen. And I'm just going to draw the branches this time. And I think overall this arrangement of trees looks pretty good, but you can always reposition them if they're not in the right place. So for that, I'm going to use the freehand selection tool, circle the tree, and just move it around with the arrow tool. And it's optional, but while we're still on this tree layer, we can use it to add some birds. And I'm going to do these with the little pine brush because it has a nice scratchy effect. And at this point, the illustration is almost done. I just need to do the kind of edge effect and then add the title at the top. So for the edge effect, I'm going to make a blank layer that's above everything, even the smoke. I'm going to use pure white, and I'm going to use one of the charcoal brushes again. I think this time I'm going to use the 6B compressed. And I'm going to use it to kind of dress the edge of this and round all the corners. And that looks pretty good. Now keep in mind, we haven't actually erased through the painting. We've just added this kind of white frame onto it. And you can see this more clearly in the thumbnail in the layers panel. And a kind of interesting effect you can get from this is if you use the eraser brush to kind of erase where all the roads kind of go beyond the edge. And if you do this, it kind of makes the roads look like they're on a slightly different layer. And I think it has a cool effect. And it's totally optional, but to finish this up, I'm going to add a simple scratchy title at the top. And there we go, our simple storybook landscape is all done. If you think I've earned it, please give this video a like, and if you want to learn more about painting cute landscapes like this, I think you'll love to watch one of these 2 videos next.